If you had asked me a year ago, I would have said I was one of the lucky ones. Eric wasn't just charming. He was attentive, warm, the kind of man who'd notice when I needed a moment to breathe. And his mother, Vivian, she welcomed me like I was her own daughter from day one, always with a sweet word, a thoughtful gesture, a little something she'd picked up just because. I remember her saying more than once, "You're the best thing that ever happened to my son." And I believed her. God, I really believed her. At first, it felt like I had won the emotional lottery. I'd see friends complain about their in-laws or distant husbands, and I'd quietly count my blessings. We had dinner at Vivian's every Sunday, pot roast, candles, laughter. She'd touch my hand at the table, eyes soft, and whisper how lucky Eric was. It was comforting, the way she doted on both of us. And I guess that comfort made it easier to overlook the little things. Things that didn't quite add up, but never screamed for attention, just whispered. Like the time Eric said he was working late, but Vivian had already mentioned he wasn't at the office, or when a receipt disappeared from my purse before I could even ask about it. I'd chalk it up to memory, stress, anything but deceit. And every time doubt crept in, Vivian was there with an easy smile, a convenient explanation, a gentle reassurance that I was just overthinking. I didn't want to be suspicious. I wanted to be loved. And I thought I was, by both of them. But something shifted. Not suddenly, not loudly. It was like a slow leak in a tire. I started feeling it in the silences, the pauses between answers when I asked where Eric had been, the way Vivian's voice would change ever so slightly when she stepped in to explain on his behalf. She'd say things like, "Oh, he mentioned something about staying late," but her eyes would dart away, just for a second. Just long enough to plant a seed I didn't want to water. I told myself I was being paranoid, that not every marriage stays shiny forever, and maybe I was just tired, reading too much into things. But deep down, I knew. There's a kind of knowing that settles in your chest before your brain dares admit it. A heaviness, a tension that sits between your ribs and waits. I started noticing how often Vivian would change the subject when things got uncomfortable. How quick she was to offer me distractions, recipes, gossip, plans for the next family dinner, anything but answers. And Eric became a master of vagueness. "Just meetings," he'd say, or, "You know how the office is." But I didn't know. Not anymore. The man who once shared every boring detail of his day suddenly had no stories, and every time I got close to asking questions that mattered, Vivian would pop up with a laugh or a hug or some tale from Eric's childhood. She wasn't just deflecting, she was directing. And I started to wonder if the warmth I thought I felt from her wasn't love at all, but strategy. Still, I held on. To the dinners, to the smiles, to the version of my life I desperately wanted to be real. I didn't want to believe that the people closest to me, the ones who looked me in the eye and called me family, could also be the ones keeping things from me. That kind of betrayal doesn't come with sirens. It comes with quiet moments where your gut clenches, and you smile anyway. Where your mind says, something's wrong, but your heart begs you to stay quiet, to stay soft. I remember folding laundry one night, staring at a shirt Eric hadn't worn in weeks, and wondering why my love felt more like work than joy. It was little things like that. Moments alone, small doubts, half-truths that echoed louder in the silence. I stopped sleeping through the night. My dreams were restless, full of shadows and muffled voices. And yet, every morning, I played the role. I kissed him goodbye, I texted Vivian thank yous, and I wore that stupid smile like armor. Because the truth hadn't hit me yet. Not fully. I was still in the middle of the illusion, still hoping that love could be louder than suspicion. But deep down, the cracks had already started to speak louder than the smiles. And once you hear them, really hear them, there's no turning down the volume. It happened on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. Eric had just gotten home from work, dropped his keys in the bowl like always, and headed to the shower. I was in the kitchen reheating leftovers when I saw it. His phone, face up, charging on the counter. The screen lit up. One message, one name I didn't recognize. L. I wasn't even planning to touch it. But my eyes locked onto the words, and my heart dropped before I could even process what I was seeing. It was short, flirtatious, familiar. Nothing that screamed affair on its own, but enough to make my stomach twist. "Miss last night already," it said. That was all. Just that. And in that moment, everything inside me slowed down. I don't remember walking over to the phone. I just remember my fingers moving like they belonged to someone else, opening the thread, scrolling. And then, there it was, a message to Vivian, sent late at night, casual, thankful, dangerous. "Thanks for covering for me last night. Gina still thinks I was at your house." That one sentence, that one careless confession. I didn't feel the floor beneath me. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just stared at the screen, waiting for it to disappear. As if maybe, if I blinked hard enough, the words would vanish. But they didn't. And that's when I realized the betrayal wasn't just his. It was hers, too. I sat down at the table without even thinking. The microwave beeped behind me, food forgotten. My hands were still holding his phone, but they didn't feel like mine. I kept scrolling, reading back through weeks of messages, little lies dressed up as charm. Flirty texts, late-night plans, inside jokes, and then, sprinkled in between them, messages to Vivian, confirmations, gratitude. Her silence wasn't passive. It was part of the design. My heart wasn't breaking. Not yet. It was waking up, to how long this had been going on, to how many nights I'd fallen asleep thinking Eric was working late, while Vivian sent him smiley faces and covered his tracks. It made my skin crawl. I thought of all the times she'd hugged me goodbye at the door, all the times she'd called me sweet girl and asked how I was sleeping. And I started wondering if she'd ever meant a single word of it. The worst part wasn't the cheating. Not really. It was the alliance. The quiet, cruel bond between mother and son, built on my trust, my kindness, my blind spots. I had no idea how long they'd been working together like this, how many dinners I'd smiled through while they exchanged knowing glances behind my back. And suddenly, I wasn't just angry. I was humiliated. I felt small in a life I thought I had built, like I'd been living in someone else's story, and I was the only one who didn't know the plot. I wanted to confront him right there, throw the phone, scream, demand answers. But something stopped me. Not fear, not even shock. It was clarity. Cold, steady, unfamiliar clarity. I knew in that moment that yelling wouldn't fix this. Crying wouldn't unravel their lies. What I needed was control, not chaos. I put the phone back exactly where it was, screen down, and turned off the microwave. My appetite was gone, replaced by a quiet fire building in my chest. Later that night, he wrapped his arms around me in bed like he always did. I lay there, still, listening to his breathing slow as he drifted to sleep. I studied the rhythm of it, how peaceful he looked in the dark. I wondered how many lies a person could tell and still sleep like that. And then I thought of Vivian again. Her soft voice, her homemade pies, her little compliments, all of it a costume. And suddenly, I couldn't decide who I was angrier with, the man who lied to me, or the woman who helped him do it. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't shake him awake and demand the truth. I just stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding in my ears, already writing the next move in my head. Because if they wanted to pretend everything was fine, I could play that game too. For now. I didn't text her. I didn't call ahead. I just showed up at Vivian's door the next morning, holding a mug of coffee I hadn't touched, and a phone full of truths I never asked for. She opened the door like nothing had changed. Robe on, hair pinned, eyes warm. "Oh, Gina, what a surprise." I smiled back, and it was the most rehearsed smile I'd ever worn. She stepped aside to let me in, humming something soft, like this was just another visit, just another day in our perfect little lie. I sat on her couch, watched her pour tea, watched her avoid my eyes. And when she finally sat down across from me, I handed her Eric's phone, already open, already on the message. She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. Her face told me everything. First the flinch, then the pause, then the desperate calm. "It's not what you think," she said, voice trembling just enough to sound human. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The silence between us was already screaming. She started to explain. To twist. "He's just confused, Gina. Marriage is hard. I was only trying to help. I didn't want to see you two fall apart over a mistake." Her voice cracked on that word. Mistake. Like she knew how hollow it sounded. I looked at her, really looked, and saw her for who she was. Not the kind, doting woman I had admired, but someone who'd chosen his comfort over my dignity, who stood by while I was lied to because it was easier for her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just let her talk, let her unravel, because every word she spoke dug the hole deeper. You have to understand, she said, leaning forward like closeness could fix what silence had rotted. Eric's always been complicated. He doesn't think things through. He's scared of losing you. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. The way she made excuses for a grown man like he was still a boy afraid of consequences. Then she said something that made my skin crawl. I was protecting your marriage. I looked at her, finally, and everything inside me went still. No, I said, my voice like ice. You weren't protecting my marriage. You were protecting him. There's a difference. And in that moment, I saw her mask slip, just for a second. The softness in her eyes hardened. The tilt of her head straightened. The guilt gave way to pride, like she truly believed she'd done the right thing by keeping me in the dark. All those years of kindness, the baked goods, the thoughtful cards, the little compliments. They weren't love. They were currency. She had been buying my silence long before I ever had a reason to question her. And now, sitting across from her, I realized she never saw me as family. I was just an extension of her son. Something to manage, to manipulate, to preserve her illusion of control. And that illusion? It was starting to fall apart in her hands. She tried to recover, to soften the moment. Gina, please, don't throw everything away over this. Her voice was quieter now, but not gentle, calculated. Like I could still be reasoned with, still be swayed back into silence. But something in me had shifted. The woman who once looked at Vivian with gratitude was gone. All I saw now was someone who watched me walk into betrayal with a smile on her face and chose to say nothing. Over and over again. I stood up. My hands weren't shaking. My voice was steady. You say you were protecting us, but you were never protecting me. You protected his peace. You protected your perfect little image of him. And you let me believe in a lie because it was easier for you than facing the truth. I watched her flinch, not because she didn't understand, but because she did. For once, she had nothing left to say. No deflections, no sweet words to cover the wreckage. As I walked to the door, I didn't slam it. I didn't need to. The silence I left behind was louder than anything I could have screamed. Vivian had spent years playing the sweet protector, the mother-in-law every woman dreams of, but now I saw her clearly. Not as a guardian, not as family, but as another accomplice in the quiet crime of betrayal. After that day, I stopped asking questions. I stopped trying to make sense of their lies or piece together timelines. I already had everything I needed, not just the messages, but the silence, the avoidance, the way they both looked at me like I was fragile and foolish. I wasn't either. I was done. And I knew I couldn't leave in a storm. No, they didn't deserve the drama. They deserved something far more unsettling. My absence, delivered quietly, like a mirror they'd be forced to stare into. I started planning in silence. Every night, while Eric scrolled through his phone or fell asleep with his arm lazily draped across me, I was making lists in my mind. What I'd take, what I'd leave behind, what I'd say, or rather, what I wouldn't. I called a lawyer during my lunch breaks, transferred money while he showered. Bit by bit, I was building my exit like a woman folding a parachute, not because she planned to jump, but because she knew the fall was inevitable. He had no clue. That was the part that both sickened me and gave me strength. He was still kissing me on the forehead, asking what I wanted for dinner, complaining about work, and all I could think was, this man believes he's safe. He thinks the lie still holds. He thinks I'm still asleep. But I was already gone. Not physically, not yet. But emotionally, I had walked out weeks ago. There was something almost sacred about the quiet preparation. No fights, no scenes. Just the steady rhythm of reclaiming my life, one silent decision at a time. I canceled subscriptions he didn't even know we had. I copied documents, opened a P.O. box, rented a storage unit under a name he'd never recognize. Every step felt like a thread being pulled from the tapestry of our life. Slow, deliberate, irreversible. And he never noticed a thing. I started packing little by little. A few clothes hidden in the bottom of gym bags, jewelry tucked into my work tote. I even smiled more. It threw him off, I think. Made him believe I was finally back to normal. And Vivian? She called once that week, her voice syrupy sweet, asking if we were doing better. I answered with kindness. Let her think she'd won. Because there's nothing more dangerous than a woman who lets you believe she's forgiven you when all she's done is outgrow you. I waited until a Thursday. Not because it meant anything, but because it didn't. A forgettable day for a moment I'd remember forever. He had just left for work, still humming that stupid song he always hummed when he was pleased with himself. I watched his car pull away, then stepped back inside and opened the drawer where I'd hidden the envelopes. 3 of them. 1 for him, 1 for her, and 1 for me. I placed them carefully on the kitchen table. No theatrics, no dramatic flair. Just truth, sealed in paper. Eric's envelope held the divorce papers. Nothing messy, nothing cruel. Just facts, dates, decisions. Proof that I no longer needed his permission to choose peace. Vivian's envelope was thinner, but heavier in a different way. It held copies of the messages, printed in black and white. I didn't add a single word. Let her read her own loyalty in silence. The last envelope was for me. I'd written it weeks ago, late at night, after one of those evenings where Eric had kissed me goodnight without even seeing me. I titled it Freedom. Inside was a letter to the woman I'd almost forgotten, the one who used to laugh without hesitation, who trusted her instincts, who didn't beg to be chosen. It wasn't for closure, it was for remembrance, a promise to myself that I'd never disappear in someone else's life again. I locked the door behind me, took one last look at the home that had become a stranger, and walked away without turning back. No dramatic exit, no vindictive words. Just the quiet sound of keys dropped into a mailbox, and the weight of a chapter ending, not with heartbreak, but with intention. They thought they could control the story, but I had rewritten the ending in silence. It's strange how peace doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it slips in slowly, in the way the morning sun hits your new kitchen window, or the quiet hum of a place that holds only your things, your energy, your breath. My new apartment was small, but it felt like mine. Every chair, every plate, every quiet moment belonged to me. No one asking where I'd been, no voices explaining away lies. Just space, just air, just me, learning how to breathe again. At first I waited for the storm, for the begging, the blaming, the dramatics, but Eric didn't even know I'd left until hours later. And when he did call, first confused, then angry, then desperate, I didn't pick up. I let his messages pile up like old mail. Vivian tried too. A voicemail that started with "Gina, sweetheart," and ended with silence when she realized I wasn't playing along anymore. I didn't block them at first. I wanted to see what they'd do when they lost control of the narrative. But then I did. I blocked them both. Not out of rage, out of clarity. I didn't need their explanations, their guilt, or their apologies. What I needed was to protect the quiet I had built, the one they tried to convince me I didn't deserve. And in the space they left behind, something unexpected began to grow. One night, a friend invited me to a support group. Nothing formal, just women sitting in a circle, sharing pieces of their lives like puzzle fragments. I almost didn't go. I was tired of talking, tired of rehashing what had already broken. But something in me said try. So I went. And when it was my turn to speak, I didn't tell them everything. Just enough. Enough to feel the air shift, to watch heads nod, eyes widen, hands reach for mine with unspoken understanding. Afterwards, one woman came up to me, older, kind eyes, voice low. She said, "Thank you. I thought I was crazy for leaving a family that smiled to my face and stabbed me in the back." And suddenly I knew why I'd gone, why I had to tell it, not for sympathy, not for validation, but because stories like mine don't get told loud enough. We learn to protect the people who hurt us, especially when they do it with a smile and call it love. So I started writing. Not a book, not a blog, just anonymous stories, bits and pieces of what happened, shared in online groups where women go when they think they're the only one. And they started replying, dozens of them, some with heartbreak, some with rage, all of them with stories that sounded too familiar. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't just walked away from a man. I had walked away from a system that taught me to stay quiet. They say healing is a process, but I think it's more like a mosaic, a broken thing rearranged into something stronger. Some days I still feel the sting. A song will play, a scent will drift in through the window, and for a second, I'm back in that house, back in that silence. But then I remember who I am now. A woman who didn't just survive betrayal. She named it, faced it, and walked away from it without needing to burn the whole thing down to prove her worth. Eric still tries sometimes, through new numbers, through mutual friends. I hear his name now, and it lands like background noise, dull, distant, irrelevant. Vivian, I assume, is still spinning her version of the story. Let her. Let them. Because I'm no longer part of it. I didn't leave to be a villain in their eyes. I left to become the hero in my own. And that means not looking back to fix what they never intended to protect in the first place. So when I sit down now, coffee in hand, peace in my chest, and a story on my screen, I don't feel bitter. I feel clear. I feel free. And I feel certain that someone, somewhere, will read my words and recognize themselves. Maybe they'll find the courage to leave. Maybe they'll find the strength to stay gone. Either way, they'll know they're not alone. Because I didn't just leave a man. I left the system that protected him,